I'm Randy Knipple. I'm the GIS manager at Dakota County, Minnesota, but also we have a emergency preparedness committee under our state GIS office, and I co-chair that.
We are really excited to have Randy with us today to talk about the U.S. National Grid. John and I have been just talking about who in the community has been doing some interesting things, and we had heard from Randy that he's been doing some pretty cool stuff with the USNG, and so we're really excited to have him present to us today. So we'll turn this over to Randy, and then at the end we'll open it up to some Q&A. If you have any issues come up during the presentation, you can type those into the chat window, and I'll try to respond to you. But with that, I guess, Randy, take it away.
All right, thank you. Appreciate the invitation to give this presentation to this group. It sounds like a really good group to talk to about this topic. I'm not sure how much everybody in the audience knows about National Grid. I will make certain assumptions that you've at least heard of it, but I've titled my title slide here is Getting the Game, and I've given this presentation to a wide variety of audiences, from first responders to emergency managers and to GIS folks as well. And the last time I gave it, I added this, Getting the Game, perhaps a little bit out of frustration. I was aware that there are GIS folks out there that are still resistant to advocating for the U.S. National Grid and implementing it, and I don't want to be in your face about this or assume that any of you are in that camp. But if you are, I'm not going to call you out or expect you to call yourself out. But the intent is that I'm going to show you a bunch of slides and try to give you an overview of all these kind of the different dimensions that I'm aware of related to National Grid, and I'm sure I'm going to leave some stuff out, but the intent is that we'd overcome any of those reservations that you may have, or if you have no reservations, perhaps give you some tools and some ammunition that you can use as you advocate for this in your organization and beyond. So I've got a bunch of slides, as I said, I've given to a variety of different audiences. I do make use of a lot of animation in here, and hopefully I haven't done this in a web environment, and now we're doing a two-stage thing here between Skype and Join Me, so hopefully it will still work effectively. But anyway, to give just a quick overview, the U.S. National Grid has been a national standard since 2001. Adopted by several federal agencies, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, Department of Homeland Security, National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, and the United States Geological Survey. And the significance of that is that the first two are the emergency management side of the federal government, and the last two is the geospatial side of the federal government. So it's been adopted by both sides of this equation, so to speak. It's also been adopted by several states. It is, in fact, the military grid referencing system. And in the presentations that I give, I try to get to this point as quickly as possible to make people comfortable with the fact that this is nothing new. All we're doing is taking something that is well established in the military. It's been around since World War II, and we're applying it for civilian purposes. And that has some other benefits. And if we get into situations where we have to bring the National Guard in, we'll be directly interoperable with them as well. It is used also by all NATO forces. It isn't just in the United States. It covers the entire world. And another point that I try to get to very quickly with geospatial folks is that it's based on UTM coordinates. Again, it's nothing new. This is just a convenient notation for UTM coordinates that minimizes the chance for errors in radio transmissions of geolocational information. And if we think about the parallels between military operations and emergency management and emergency response operations, there are certainly a lot of things that we could consider to be common between them. So it's taking a best practice from the military and applying it to civilian purposes. So of course it applies when we get into situations where we have major disaster events like a tornado, as you see here, a large tornado event. Certainly hurricanes are even more devastating and much more far-reaching, and that's really when we get into the need for this. And so if we think about an event like a tornado, we've lost all of the visual cues in the field that relate to describing locations. So we don't have addresses, we don't have street signs. It's even difficult to see where the streets were, and it's just one continuous debris field. And so how do we help first responders make sense out of this? Well, the grid provides that, and really the grid is based on GPS. So the combination of GPS knowledge and as well as the maps that are then associated with that give them tools that they can use to either find locations in the field based on things that are on the maps, or conversely to be able to relay locations from the field or track their activities in the field. And so the whole idea is to create maps and mapping products and services that include the key resources, vulnerable population, and critical infrastructure, so that they're able to use those maps as a resource. And so fundamentally, this is all about teaching first responders and emergency managers the basics of land navigation and map reading. And that was really a revelation for me, where we in the geospatial world take maps for granted. And really, when I first was introduced to the National Grid, my thought was, well, we don't make maps, we make apps. I'm a programmer. That's what we do, and we can do cool stuff with that. But at a fundamental level, they don't appreciate necessarily the value of a map, and they will work more in terms of what they can visualize in their head and how they can describe things about their community to the other folks that understand the community, their community as well. But as soon as you start thinking about it in terms of mutual aid, where you have an event that's large enough that they've exhausted their resources and now have to call in resources from outside their community that don't have the same kind of knowledge about their community, they have to be able to give them something that helps them understand something about that community. And I've heard the stories of people responding to from across the country to the hurricane events. On their way down, they're stopping at the convenience stores and the gas stations and trying to grab hold of any maps they can find that help them create their own situational awareness of where they're going. And so along with the large disasters, it also applies in situations where you have other things that are difficult to describe. So things like aircraft crashes, things that happen on rivers, waterways, railroads, and then snowstorm events and blizzards. And we've got one on our radar right now here in Minnesota, if you've been paying attention. These things are difficult to describe as far as their location goes. And so having something like a uniform location referencing system like the U.S. National Grid is key. The National Search and Rescue Committee has defined the U.S. National Grid as the primary location referencing system for all search and rescue operations. It's also described this as, it also describes latitude longitude as the secondary location referencing system, and using the specific format of degrees, minutes, decimal, minutes. It does identify latitude longitude as the primary location referencing system for aeronautical resources. However, it states that any aeronautical resources that are supporting ground-based operations will use the ground-based primary location referencing system, which is the National Grid. And so this is firmly established as the only way to describe locations in the search and rescue operation. One example that I had here locally, we have an organization called Special Operations Team. They are part of the Minnesota Task Force 1. And these are the elite in emergency responders, and these folks are trained in hazmat, rope rescues, building collapse, trench rescues, and things like that. They have to be appointed and to this team and to be able to get all of that training. Well, they were aware of search and rescue operations. They've been through the search and rescue training, of course. And they had a situation where they were called out to do a search of this particular area. 2 other searches had been done prior to this, and they were both unsuccessful, including canine resources. So they determined they were going to do a grid search. They were aware of the National Grid. They went on scene. There was some resistance from the team, And they decided, oh, we're just going to go out there and just do this. We don't need to do this grid thing. Very quickly, they realized that with all the underbrush, they were not able to keep track of where their resources were, and were not able to go through the area systematically. They regrouped, pulled out the maps, pulled out their GPS, worked within these 100-meter squares by having people separated 10 meters apart, and of somebody with a GPS receiver on each end of their line, and they were able to then go through this area systematically and check off 100-meter grid squares as they were completed. They continued through the entire park that way until they were actually successful in finding the victim, where these other attempts were unsuccessful. Since then, the members of this team have become strong advocates for use of the national grid and integrating it in their processes. And I bring this up because that's the kind of thing that happens in the emergency response and the emergency management community. You know, they're a little bit resistant to these things initially, but once they see it and once they actually try it and they become the strong advocates for it, now we have their own elite that are advocating for this within their own community, and it's a lot different. They're much more successful at it than I am as a geospatial professional. So where do we get these maps? Well, all the USGS US topo maps are US National Grid compliant. We have UTM grids on all the maps. You can see the reference at the bottom there to the US National Grid. The US National Grid in the MGRS simply takes advantage of the way that the grids are labeled. So we have the principal digits that are shown with larger numbers, and those are the numbers that are used for the national grid. And so what that means is we just eliminate the smaller numbers because they are not as significant when we're working at a local level. So it's really just using that kind of a notation. These maps are US National Grid compliant, and a little bit of training. It's very easy for people to use them that way. All the US topos are available online, of course, for the entire country. We've adapted similar things at a local level for creating large-scale maps. So the US topos are 1 to 24,000 scale. We've adopted this 8.5 by 11, 1 inch equals 500 foot, 1 to 6,000 scale maps because they're very low cost. We can create these maps as a map library, create map books very easily. They can be printed out on any printer, and we can make copies of pages very easily and things like that. So this works very well. These maps are based on the 1 kilometer squares of the U.S. National Grid, or 1 kilometer squares of UTM. That works very well. It's also very easy then to, we have a very convenient naming system for all of the maps. So 7456 is the name of this map. And again, at a local level, that's sufficient to make that map name unique across our entire county and beyond. So map 7456, we can simply train people that they read, write, and up. They can describe a 100-meter grid square by adding a digit in X and Y. So now 741565 uniquely describes that 100-meter square. And then further, we can add one more digit and estimate a location to 10 meters of precision within that 10-meter grid, or the 100-meter grid square. So now 74135658 uniquely describes that 10-meter location. In the same way, we also create some smaller scale maps. So we've created maps based on the U.S. National Grid at a 10-kilometer square at 1 to 24,000 scale. These are 22 by 24 inches. It's very easy, again, to be able to use those maps as an index into the 8.5 by 11 maps by simply using the grid numbers. So 7456 on the large map relates to page 7456, which has much more detail. It has all the addresses and the fire hydrants and the street names and things like that. All those 10K maps for the state of Minnesota are available online as PDF files. You can select them individually or go to the FTP site and download them en masse. Iowa has done something similar as well. They have the same 10K map series and 1K map series and map books that are all available online. So here you can just showing how you can zoom in, select the map, and be able to download it. The blue outlines there represent the map books that are also available. So along with the printed maps, these are all created as PDF files. All the map books are multi-page PDF files as well. We can automate the production very nicely in ArcMap using data-driven pages. We can also do some Python scripting to create the map books once we have all the pages created. So we can really automate the whole thing. Once we update the maps, we run a script and all the map books get created and copied out to a website. So what we end up with is a map library or multiple map libraries. We can have a variety of different map series based on the same format. All of the maps for the state of Minnesota, all the maps for our entire region will fit on a jump drive. So now we have something. All these maps to be used. I'm sorry. Somebody speaking?
I think they're not on mute.
Can you still hear me? Yeah, somebody's not muted. Okay, I'll continue. Somebody confirm you can hear me?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So that gives us standalone map libraries, completely transportable. We can print what we need, and anybody can do it. It doesn't take a GIS professional to do this. They can be very adept at finding the maps that they need, get them out of the affected area to be printed, and then distribute them to the field resources. Along with being PDF maps, these are actually geospatial PDF maps. All the U.S. topos are geospatial PDFs as well. That means that we can use them in something like the Avenza PDF Maps app. All the U.S. topos are available for free in Avenza PDF Maps. I'm not trying to sell the app, but it is it's free at a basic level, free for personal use. You can also import your own maps into it as well. And what that means is that once you have one of these geospatial PDFs loaded onto your device, you can run completely standalone. You don't need an internet connection to use GPS. And so you can actually track your location on these maps on the mobile device. A variety of other mobile apps that support the USNG. Some of them, you have to go in and set the correct coordinate system. Some of them will simply use MGRS. And for all practical purposes, MGRS and USNG are synonymous. Some of them integrate the camera, some just have the coordinate display, some use orthophotography. You can just search your app store for MGRS and you'll find a variety of them available. One app actually isn't an app; it's a browser application. Is usngapp.org. This was created recently by a nonprofit called Shared Geo, and my cohort, Steve Swayze, here in Minnesota, that I've been working with, created Shared Geo a while back as a way to try to create a mechanism for providing some funding for GIS activities, including the U.S. National Grid. So that's been they've been able to provide a lot of good support. usngapp.org is an example of that. There's no cost associated with it. And what it does is it shows your location in this specific format, which is the same as emergency location markers, which is a de facto standard that has emerged through the work that Shared Geo has done as a way of providing location markers in parks and on trails and things like that that relate directly to the U.S. National Grid. The USNG app is a native mobile app that has been created for both Android and iOS, and it was created by Esri Labs. And once they realized that Shared Geo had also created something very similar, they contacted Shared Geo, and Shared Geo, they actually offered it to Shared Geo. And so Shared Geo is going to take over the further development of that USNG native app. That should be available. It's available right now, but they'll be refining it, and that also includes a map display too. Another application online is GMAP4. This was created by a guy named Joseph Elfelt, and I believe he's from out in Washington. We had somebody online from Washington. And he's created this. He has his own private business that's for really property information, but he also is a strong supporter of the U.S. National Grid. And one thing in there, as you can see on the screen, he has some documentation on read why the USNG is important, and he's done a really good job of capturing in one page why that is true, and I always refer to that as a real good overview. He's also created another free web application called Find Me SAR, and that provides locations, your current location in U.S. National Grid coordinates, as well as several others too, but it defaults to USNG. USNGcenter.org is a website that is the premier resource for information about the U.S. National Grid. There's a lot of information out there. It was created and is hosted by SharedGeo as well. Steve's also now pursuing something he's calling the USNG Institute to provide some guidance on the policy side of embracing the USNG and tracking its implementation across the country. Along with background information on the U.S. National Grid, we've also published some instructions on how to create the USNG map books, and there's an MXD in there for ArcMap users. Seriously, in about 5 minutes, you can have your own 1K maps created just using, whatever base map you have or you choose to use. They also have an interactive app where they are providing an indication of where there are U.S. National Grid maps and map books displayed. This is a little bit out of date, doesn't have all of Minnesota, doesn't have all of Iowa in there, and there are others as well. Some other websites out there, USNG Florida, USNG Iowa, really created through the personal initiative of a couple of people in each of those, or somebody in each of those states. And I think that's really what we're seeing, is that this is a very organic thing that's happening from the ground up. Individuals really seize this whole concept and take their own personal initiative to start promoting this within their states. With the hurricane season last year, we saw this website created by Highfield, and it was nice to see that they had prominently on that website USNG map books and resources that were created for that event. So that's an important piece, along with everything else, starting to see some of these key players in the geospatial community at a national level starting to, in effect, advocate for use of the U.S. National Grid. Otherwise, at the state level, here's an example of some information online. We're starting to see some articles and things like that published online. Here we had something from the Florida Fire Chiefs Association providing a position statement on the use of the U.S. National Grid. The NGA has some articles online, and they include information about the Military Grid Reference System, UTM, and why have grids on maps. And I think that last one, why have grids on maps, really resonates with me. Having done GIS for quite a while, since before it was called GIS, I recall when I started here at Dakota County, we made maps, but we never put grids on maps. And that was one of the fundamental things that I learned a long time ago, is that you always put a spatial reference on your maps. And I think we've kind of drifted away from that for some reason. And so now we put grids on all of our maps, because you never know which map might get pulled out of a drawer in a disaster situation. So I really try to remind people that, as cartographers, that's one of the key elements that we need to make sure. And if we're going to put a grid on a map, it should be a UTM grid for use as a U.S. National Grid by convention. Also, there was a couple of articles in the American Surveyor magazine. The significance here is that we certainly also have to have the support of the land surveying community here. Here in Minnesota, land surveyors typically use our county coordinate systems. At least our county surveyors do. You know, our Minnesota geodesists defined the best projection for each county, and as a result, we have county coordinates. It means nothing to anybody outside of our county, and it certainly isn't consistent at a national level. You know, and so while we certainly work with county coordinates when we're developing our cadastral database, when we're presenting this information on maps, we don't do that using county coordinates. We do it using UTM coordinates. This is a couple of articles from the United States Fire Academy. They produce these coffee break training flyers that come out for anybody that has subscribed to these things. And there have been a couple of articles that have come out talking about the U.S. National Grid and the emergency location markers. I know that the Fire Academy has also integrated the U.S. National Grid into some of their curriculum as well. And again, having that kind of an endorsement and promotion at the federal level is very important. So what about lat long? You know, I put this in. This is a slide that I use because I expect resistance, and I've gotten less resistance over time. But this is something that comes up. You know, people say, why do we have to use this grid? Why can't I just use GPS? I have GPS on my phone. Why can't I just use GPS? Well, you know, they don't understand that there are multiple coordinate systems. You know, and so I can ask, well, which coordinate system? Well, you know, they may not even realize there are multiple coordinate systems. Maybe they understand that they have latitude, longitude, and so they may say, well, we'll just use lat long. Well, then which format? Well, they don't realize there are multiple formats. And the significance of that is that if you don't get it right, and if you're relaying a location in lat long, and the person on the other end doesn't understand the terminology that you're using, it's very easy to mess things up and end up with a significant difference in the actual location on the ground. So simply describing that it isn't intuitive because it's in a base 60 systems. There are multiple formats. We need to at least understand that. When relaying these locations in latitude, longitude over a radio, there are other words that are essential in that communication. You have to say degrees at the right place. You have to say minutes in the right place. You have to say decimal, and you have to say seconds, and you have to make sure you're using west longitude or negative numbers and things like that. And that can be very, very confusing, and especially if you don't get it right or if it's misinterpreted. Whereas with the U.S. National Grid, at a local level, it's 8 digits. It's very straightforward. And finally, due to the fact that lat long is not a projection, it's difficult to imagine the relative spatial relationship from one location to another. We can certainly calculate it, and there are certainly websites that can do it, but you can't visualize it very well. And if you visualize it as rectangular coordinates, you can really create issues. NAPSIG is the National Alliance of Public Safety GIS Professionals. We created an implementation guide to the USNG a few years ago. There were a number of people that were involved, and the significance here is that it's a combination of GIS and emergency management and emergency response communities represented in this. And we got together, put our heads together, and came up with something I think it's only 16 pages. Tried to do it something that was very concise, that would help give people a quick overview of what this thing is all about. There are a number of us that really communicate on a regular basis, and these are just people that I've gotten to know that are promoting this stuff, and you'll see it's a combination of people from different disciplines. But the significance here is that this has happened organically as well, just by personal contact, but we really don't have any good way of organizing at a national level, so that we know who else is doing this and we can leverage each other's experiences. And it's a very useful thing that I've found when when I can just throw something out to this whole group as an email, and we'll have an email conversation about it. So it'd be really good to see something that really helps take this to the next level, where we can create more of a U.S. National Grid community nationally to help each other out as we move forward with this. The FGDC created a cartographic standard in 2001. That was really when it became a national standard. This is our Bible, tells us how to make maps that are U.S. National Grid compliant. More recently, FEMA, which unfortunately was rather slow to become active, to actively promote the use of the U.S. National Grid. But in 2015, they came out with this directive, and it's really very blunt in several ways, but it describes FEMA's role. And as a policy statement, it says FEMA will use the U.S. National Grid as its standard geographic referencing system for land-based operations, and will encourage use of the USNG among whole community partners. So it's not just about using it themselves, it's about promoting it and encouraging local government, state and local government, to use it as well. And that was very significant. Also, even more recently, just fall of last year, there was an update to the National Incident Management System document, 3rd edition only. It had not been updated in about 10 years. And this was significant. It came out, it had multiple references to the U.S. National Grid. And so having this very prominently documented within something like this document that all emergency managers and emergency responders are really responsible for is significant, and I think we can expect to see a much broader acceptance of the U.S. National Grid because of this. Esri also has been a bit slow to embrace this. They've had military analysts out there. You have to spend about, I don't know, $10,000 to get it. But now there are things that are much more easily accessible and more prominent. So there is a U.S. National Grid REST service that's available that they publish that actually comes right. You can even see the name of it there, NG_US National Grid. It's a map service that anybody can add to their applications or ArcGIS. They also added, you can see an ArcGIS blog there, major enhancements to the Esri World Geocoding Service. So anybody using ArcMap, if you use their default geocoding service, you can enter U.S. National Grid locations directly in there, and it will interpret them. And then just by the way, I don't have a slide here for it, but Google has done the same thing. So those are both very, very strong developments that occurred. Computer-aided dispatch has been a bit of a problem. We kind of get a chicken and egg thing going where first responders say, well, we can't do it until dispatch is doing it, and dispatch says, well, we can't do it until first responders want it, and then you get the computer-aided dispatch vendors don't have it integrated into their software, and they say the same thing. So until somebody's asking for it, we won't add it. We had a situation here in Dakota County. We got a new dispatch system. It's the TriTech system, which is there are only a few of them out there. And it took us about 6 months before somebody involved in the actual system support for the dispatch system realized that they were looking for an option that said USNG, and meanwhile there was an option there the whole time that said MGRS. All they had to do was check a box. And so, there's that part of the equation too, is helping people understand what it is that we're talking about. It is the MGRS, and it was just simply a miscommunication. So we have MGRS turned on. They can see coordinates displayed, locations displayed using MGRS, and so now there's direct interoperability between CAD and first responders in Dakota County. Also, there are videos online. These are YouTube videos. Al Stute in the upper left corner, he's the guy who's been involved in a number of those other slides that I showed. He works for Canaveral Fire. He's also a part of Florida Task Force 1. He has really embraced this as his own personal mission. He's been out doing some training as well. He's got some training videos out there, and it's just they're very concise, very straightforward. And he's doing it from that emergency responder perspective. There's a video out there from the Cook County Sheriff, Cook County, Minnesota. They implemented the U.S. National Grid emergency location markers signs out on snowmobile trails in northern Minnesota. But providing that kind of leadership, having the county sheriff doing essentially a public message explaining to people why these things are important and how to use them is very important. And then FEMA has a training video, and this one's about I think it's about 25 minutes long. Very comprehensive. If you haven't looked at it, I encourage you to do so. And so it's very, very, very nice to see that thing emerge with the FEMA seal on it as well. The Iowa Task Force 1 has done a great job of creating a training video. They're doing it within the context of search and rescue. And it's relatively short. I think you can see in the bottom there, it's about an 8.5 minute video that is really focused on training for first responders. It teaches them the essence of what the National Grid is all about and how to use it. And I think they've done a very good job of that. There are other websites out there, and I always point to these because it doesn't even have to say USNG. These are just sites out there. If you just do a search on MGRS or grid referencing, these have been out there for a long time, whether they're intended for as a supplemental training for military folks or as training for backcountry trekkers. It teaches people how to do grid referencing using typically the USGS 1 to 24,000 scale topo maps. So it's all out there as supplemental training. And this is some training that Al Stute did just recently, the Michigan Task Force 1. Al's done a number of these around the country. And again, he's taking his own personal initiative to do this training. He did a 3-day exercise on search and rescue, integrating some of these free tools and teaching people how to make maps and how to read maps and how to use GPS. And again, seeing these task force ones are in each of the states, and these are the elite of first responders in each of the states, and they typically come from multiple agencies across the state. So having them learn these things and take it back and advocate for it within their own agencies is significant. Okay, so that's the end of my presentation. But I'd be happy to answer questions.
This is Dan Miller from Washington again. I think you mentioned on the Minnesota website you have the templates to make the map books and was it 10,000 meters?
1 to 6. Yeah, 1 to 6,000 scale.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's.
Go ahead.
Oh, yes, they are out there. You go to usngcenter.org.
Okay.
And I think it's under maps and I don't know. I think you can find it. If you can't find it, I can provide the direct link. But it's on usngcenter.org.
Thanks.
Is everybody else still there?
Yeah. Yep, still here.
Okay.
Any other questions? Still here.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, what's the name of the USGS app for National Grid?
The USGS app?
Yeah, the viewer for mobile use?
I'm not sure. There were a number of. There's a usngapp.org.
Well, you referenced one. You had screen grabs from one on a mobile device, and then somehow I got the notion that the USGS had a similar app.
Not USGS. Let me see if I can just get back.
Yeah, if I'm going to push something out, I'd like to be pushing out the home team. So.
Yeah. Well, was it this?
Yes, that's it.
Yeah, that's usngapp.org.
Okay, thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions for Randy?
Hi. Is it possible to roll the USNG stuff into maps served out on ArcGIS Online?
Yes, that's the that's that NGA map service. Here, let me just go ahead here. I don't know how this is working through the double present, but here, Esri publishes that NGA U.S. National Grid map service, and you can add that right into your ArcGIS Online apps.
Oh, perfect.
You can also, there's also, if you're using Web App Builder, there is a coordinate display widget, and you can set that to MGRS USNG as well.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thanks, Randy. That was a great presentation. And yeah, I do appreciate the mention of using USNG in the Web App Builder. I've toyed around with that myself, and I thought that was pretty helpful to have. Let's see. There's it looks like if you're looking specifically for that REST service that Randy's mentioned, Todd has put that into the chat. So if you want to check out the chat box, it's just right there for people to copy and paste. And Roger's got a link to a site in the chat that the Indiana Department of Natural Resources has set up. So that's more resources that are out there. And I thought this was great. I know I've seen several of the NAPSG presentations regarding USNG, and it's great to see that there's so many resources out there available, so that if this is something you're interested in implementing, it's really easy to get started at least.
Well, you know, and what like I mentioned earlier, you know, talking to this audience in particular, you guys. You know, it would be nice to see some kind of a national, I don't know what I call it, a forum or some kind of a resource that helps connect people that are doing this, because I know there are people out there that are working hard within their own jurisdictions to promote this, and it can be an uphill battle. I mean, it's taken quite a while to gain some momentum, but I think we've got some significant momentum now, and whatever we can do to help support each other, technically and emotionally, I think would be very beneficial. But I think it also helps, you know, once, you know, we're kind of hitting a critical mass here, and once others become aware of how many other people out there are working in this direction, I think that helps encourage people even further.
Definitely. Yeah, thanks for that, Randy. Let's see. Sorry, I'm trying to type notes while I'm also trying to keep ahead of things here. Great. Are there any last questions or comments for Randy before we move to the next item in our agenda?
Well, I certainly appreciate the opportunity, and if anybody wants any follow-up, you can contact me directly, and I'd be happy to chat further.
Yeah, great presentation.
Great. Would it be possible for us to get a copy of your slides that we could distribute?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Yeah, if you just send them to me, I'll make sure that gets out to folks so that they have that available.
Okay.
And thanks also, Randy, for coming up with that Skype idea. I was surprised that it worked, but I'm glad we got something that out there. Okay, so with that, I am going to switch the window that I'm presenting. So now, if I've done this correctly, you all should just see a Google Doc in it with notes. The next thing we wanted to... Sorry, what was that?
I see it.
Okay, awesome. The next thing we wanted to talk about, I wanted to turn the time over to Robin to talk about some of the work going on with the Highfield support team and looking for outreach. So, Robin, I don't know if you have any slides or you want me to just keep typing notes as you talk here.
Thanks, Josh. I do have a couple of slides, but they're not really that important to share. I'm happy to send those to you. They're really just some talking points that I want to cover. If it's easy for me to share them out while I'm speaking, that's fine. But I have several documents and various things that I'll be referencing, so it's up to you.
Well, let me see. Can I do this?
I can just launch into it. Oh, I need to download an app to share my screen.
Yeah, I was afraid of that. If you want to do that, you can, or otherwise I can just take it back and...
Yeah, let's not worry about it. My computer's pretty particular. So let me just launch into it, and I'll try to be brief because I know it's kind of a last-minute add to your agenda, and I certainly really appreciate you allowing me to have some time to speak to the group today. Some of you may know me from my previous support on the Homeland Infrastructure Foundation level data project. It was the Highfield to the Regions project at that time, where we were working directly with state, local, tribal partners to familiarize themselves and gain access to the Highfield data sets. At that time, you may, if you go back a few years, you may recall that the data was available as the Homeland Security Infrastructure Program, Freedom and Gold. And several years ago, the program sponsors, NGA and DHS, moved the data from DVD onto a online portal and separated them out into Highfield Open and Highfield Secure. So I won't go into a lot of the details related to Highfield because I will assume that most people are pretty familiar. If you're not, I would be really happy to follow up with you offline, and Josh, I have some fact sheets that were just recently updated that I can send to you to send out to everybody. So again, I support the Federal Geographic Data Committee on a couple of different fronts, one being the Highfield sponsors as well as the Highfield data team, where I'm currently doing some outreach on behalf of NGA and the Highfield subcommittee. And then I also do work for the FGDC portfolio management team for the National Geospatial Data Assets. So separate but related work related to getting the community at large access to important national level and foundational data sets. So that's a little bit on my background. In terms of this current outreach, what NGA has requested that we do is work with our state partners to update some use cases for the Highfield Open and Highfield Secure data sets. The last time that the use cases were gathered and compiled from the community, including federal and state partners, was back in 2014. Again, back at that time, it was largely related to HCIP Freedom and HCIP Gold. The total number of use cases that were provided from federal, state, tribal, and local partners was about almost 200 different use cases supporting homeland security, defense, emergency preparedness, state emergency operations centers, and emergency management as a whole. Back in 2014, the states provided more than 50 use cases for us to have a better understanding of how the foundational level data was being used for state homeland security, emergency operations centers, and state emergency preparedness. Also, back at that time, there was about another 60 use cases provided by state and local and tribal partners that were specifically for the HCIP Gold, supporting disasters in 2013 and 2014. You may be familiar with the presidential declaration process by which NGA and DHS provide the high-field secure data sets, which include the more than 125 layers of FOUO data, including the licensed commodity data that NGA purchases for use by the community. So what we're looking for now is to kind of do a refresh on the use cases, really to have a better understanding of the current uses and requirements, especially from our state partners, as well as ongoing programmatic support for Highfield to make sure that you know, we understand the widest possible application of the data sets for critical infrastructure protection and emergency management and response. So I am happy to talk with anyone individually about your particular uses that you're applying for the the Highfield open or secure data sets. And in terms of the more than 300 layers in Highfield open, how are you using those for any of your purposes? And then in terms of Highfield secure, how are you supporting presidential declarations and access to the online secure web services and data downloads? So again, I'm happy to speak with you offline and individually if you can, you know, give me a little bit of time to talk with you about how you're using the Highfield data. That would be great. I can send Josh my contact information and again, some additional background to distribute out to everyone. And I would love to be able to spend a little bit of time gathering some updated information from you all that are using Highfield data sets for your work. And then additionally, if you're newer and newer to your role and responsibility and maybe not as familiar with what's available in the Highfield data program, I would also like to just talk with you and make sure you have an understanding of what is available to you and how. So that's it in a nutshell, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Robin, this is Dan Miller from Washington State. I do have a question that relates to how do we recommend a change to a data set that you know is not right?
Yeah, that's a great question. The Highfield program absolutely solicits and encourages feedback on the program from the high level, you know, requirements side all the way down to the very specific feature, location, and attribution side. And the way to provide that feedback is to the Highfield inbox. And I can tell you what that is, but I can also send that out to Josh to distribute out so everybody has it correctly. But the Highfield support team located within the DHS Geospatial Management Office, they're a little bit separate from our team. We do more of the data compilation whereas they do the data delivery through the DHS GII and through the Homeland Security Information Network for the secure side. That email address is simply HIFLD, HIFLD, at HQ, standing for headquarters, .dhs.gov. And you can report anything over to that inbox and get support for not only access to the data, any questions you might have, as well as providing feedback about the data that you're encountering.
Just a follow-up question is, I haven't checked recently, but there used to be like regional folks, and Ron Langhelm was the regional folks for the Northwest. I don't know if he's still around or not, or if there's new folks that are representing, covering certain parts of the country.
Right. Well, we certainly wished there was, and if you want to provide that as feedback up the line, that would, I'm sure, be valuable information. As I mentioned earlier, I was one of those HIFLD to the regions team members, and I led not only the entire team of HIFLD to the region staff, but I was also the information exchange broker for the Southeast region, along with Leah Schweizer. Ron Langhelm, that team was disbanded due to funding issues back in 2012. A couple of us continued part-time on that till 2013, but it ended at that time. Really, again, not for lack of interest and desire to have that regional presence, but really there just wasn't ongoing funding available to continue. And so Ron Langhelm has, along with the rest of the team, have moved on to other responsibilities and roles now. And you may know that Ron was working on the GeoConops and different initiatives along the same line, but he's not in that role any longer, nor do we have a team together, unfortunately. That's not to say, however, that we can't, work with you on any particular, issues that you may be having, or if you have some particular requirement that, might be some multi-agency coordination or something that we can't put you in touch with the right people that can help now more from the headquarters level to answer your questions or support any collaboration requirements that you might have. And does anyone else have any other questions for me? If not, I will, again, send Josh and John out some information related to this particular initiative that we have right now, and hopefully get your responses and some feedback from you all on the updated use cases, as well as any other questions that you might have about the HIFLD program as a whole. Again, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And back over to you, Josh.
Thanks, Robin. I appreciate the update on that. I know that I've been using the HIFLD data a bit more as of late, and it's been impressive to kind of see what's in there. And it's really nice now that particularly for just as a plug for HIFLD Open, all of that is on the not DHS, it's the Geo platform. Let me see what this is. It's this site.
It's the DHS Geospatial Information Infrastructure, the GII. And the two fact sheets that I will send to you here shortly describe how to gain access to open and secure. In the case of HIFLD Secure supporting presidential declarations, there is still a process that states would need to go through following a declaration to gain access to the secure portal. And that's really, filling out a data use agreement and, making that agreement. But again, DHS headquarters can facilitate those requests and get them moved forward pretty quickly, gaining access to the 125 FOUO layers that could be really valuable to you following a declaration.
Yeah, that's great. I know we here in Utah, we had a declaration last year, and I was able to get access to Highfield Secure, and it's really impressive to me, all the data that's in there and that's available. Again, for the Highfield Open site, it's really easy to find and search, and so that's available for you, and it's really easy to use. So I've been really impressed with that. With that, I really thank you all for taking the time out of your day, and thanks again to Randy and Robin for giving us a lot of good information. We will be making the materials from this presentation available, and since you had registered to get the call-in info for this, we've got your contact information, and so we'll make sure to distribute all of the slides and relevant materials as soon as we have everything ready. And with that, thanks everyone for calling in, and we'll see you again next time.